You're listening to Mastering Change. It's great to have you back. What does it feel like to live without support? Not emotionally, but physically in your body. In this episode, I'm joined by Betsy Polatin, somatic educator and breathwork specialist, to explore how trauma disconnects us from the sense of being held by the world around us. We talk about the physical experience of support, what it means to let go of tension, and how reconnecting with the body can shift our sense of safety. Join in this conversation with your mind and body. Let's begin. Betsy Polatin, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be part of this wonderful experience that you're offering people. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Betsy. As most of our audience will already know, we start every podcast with a little card game. On these cards, which I've drawn just randomly out of a bigger pack, there is a prompt which will ideally help you lead into some sort of story. The premise of that being that stories are bridges to connection. And although many of our audience who come to the conference every year will know you by now, we have a much wider audience who might not. So it's a way to connect with them and with us as well a little bit more. So the question I have pulled, or the prompt that I have pulled, says, if my younger self could see me today, they would say ...
Wow, what a journey. Because my younger self thought whatever was happening was all there is. That because what happens when we're young, the environment forms us, and we form these adaptive patterns to adapt to the environment as it is. But that's not always our essential self. So we live and we grow up with this adaptive, like I have to be this way or I have to be that way. And yet something inside nags and says, there's something else. That doesn't feel right, that to behave that way or to be that way. And then, as we decide to, I guess, become some kind of seeker, if we're going to look at it that way, or something happens that, this happens too, something happens that forces us into change. And then it's like, oh, it's not just this, but there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And I have all these possibilities in life. And with some attention, we can find our way in a different way so that we can live life more from that essential self and less from the adaptive or traumatized version of ourself.
Can I ask, what was your catalyst to that change then? What was that? Because you just described this shift in perception, shift in view.
I think for me, there was a lot. Let me just think which one would be most helpful. Well, there's two. I'll tell this one. So I was about 16 years old, and this friend of mine was, or somebody I knew, it wasn't really a close friend, was meditating, was interested in meditation. And he said, I'm going to this meditation thing. Why don't you come? And I was like, meditation? Like, what is, what is that? But sounded interesting. So I went, and in the process of the meditation, it's interesting. It brings me to an emotional place that like, so in the process of the meditation, I felt like, wow, this is real. This is the real thing. Like everything up to my life had been, I mean, I was fine. I was like a regular kid person, and this was like something about this said, this makes more sense to me than anything in life has ever made. And so for me, I think I started meditating, at a young age, and it just led to other possibilities that weren't in my everyday life before.
Do you think that first time of meditation was the first glimpse of that true self then that you mentioned? So you kind of saw that this was somewhere you wanted to go. This is how you wanted to get to that place.
Yeah, I do think that. I think that I'm sure I had glimpses of it, in other times in my life, but as a sort of conscious thing that people are doing that I could do to have that. So then let me tell you one more, because this one was more related to my field now. So also, I was a little bit older. I was younger still. I was a young dancer, and I decided to take a choreography class. In a choreography class, you learn how to make dances. So I signed up for this class, and it happened to be with a man named Albert Pesso. Now, for those in this field, the somatic trauma field, Albert Pesso is the developer of psychomotor therapy, which is a very, very popular, well-known somatic therapy. But this was 50 years ago. He hadn't developed it yet. And so he was developing his therapy or his form on us by experimenting. So one of the things that he had us do was, again, this brings up an emotion, a deeper feeling. He had us stand in a circle, and somebody stood in the middle and put their arms out like that and faced each person with, with their arms stretched out in front of you, sort of reaching or offering to somebody. And it was such a visceral feeling. And some people laughed, some people cried, some people had no idea, like, somebody's like standing there with their arms outstretched, offering to hold you or to embrace. And so for me, it was the first time that I, in a conscious way, could see how body movements affected our emotional state. And of course, little did I know that years later, that would be my field. That's what I do.
That's
So,
really fascinating, because I think that point about recognition, that because I think quite often people experience that sensation of true self in a subconscious way, like
yes,
maybe when you're being very mindful at a sunset, or when you look at a child, but it's not on that kind of conscious, because in yoga nidra, I've, or cranial state, you can experience but it's the conscious recognition of that
right.
connection to real self. So with what you're describing, it's the difference between it being something that you sense but maybe don't recognize or acknowledge, versus when you're actually seeing it.
Yeah. And it's, we know that so much of trauma happens in relationship. And so this was about relationship. It wasn't just something that happened inside of me. It was in relationship, and seeing the different versions of, like, how we manage these kind of things. So, yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a nice point at which we can transition into how you relate to the field of trauma, mental health, and well-being. What is it that you do, your work? What is it that you want people to know and understand? But if you could just briefly first say your name and introduce yourself in your own words, then the stage is yours.
So my name is Betsy Polatin, and I call right now. I mean, it's kind of changed over the years as I don't really stay in one place, kind of thing, you know. So I call myself a breathing movement trauma resolution specialist. Those are the things that mean a lot to me, and that I believe I help people with, because you know, as I said, when I was younger, I was a dancer. So I've always been interested in how we move, how we move in a healthy way, or to not be injured. I worked with dancers in New York for years to move in a move in a way to not get injured, or to how do you come back from an injury. You know, dancers get injured a lot. And so that was always interesting to me, because we live we are we are the physicality, or the soma, the body, the living body. And it's the, you know, it's the body mind self that holds and cherishes and hides and displays every experience, every encounter that we've ever had. It's amazing. It's all in here. They live in the fabric of our body, and we have these layers of meaning that are woven into our muscles and our fascia and our tendons, and these feelings of grief or joy that lodged in our hearts, and the memories etched in our bones. You know, some of it is centuries old. So it's fascinating that we are this alive, living body, this biointelligent, psychospiritual self. And all of that has to be part of the trauma work. We can't leave that out. I mean, I assume that most people listening to this know that trauma by now, having been around the two of you, know that trauma doesn't just live in your head, you know, that this whole body, mind, self is involved, or the soma, but it's the living body that takes in so much of our experiences, and we take that meaning from that, and that's what we live with until we see that there might be something else.
I have a question about, I think, as you mentioned, anyone hopefully listening to this podcast will kind of by now understand that trauma and other things, as you just mentioned there, like joy and other emotions, can live in our body, and we've got to make this meaning, this sense making kind of. Well, that's my question really, is how do we make sense of what lives in our body? Is there a way? Is it only cognitively that we make sense of this, or is there other ways to make sense of what's stored in our body? I think I've always been interested in that, and I don't know that I know the answer at all.
Maybe if we look at an experience of it, and see if we get closer to what you're looking for with that. So I like to talk a lot about the idea of support. And I think support is very important on many levels, and I can talk a long time on that. But if we go back to our early days, when we're held in our caregiver's arms, and if that experience is really supportive, that's one thing. But often the caregiver was on the phone or cooking or working or taking care of the other children. And the child in the arms didn't really feel supported, didn't really have like a real, I am held, because the parent was doing something else. So when we have that experience, I don't feel supported. The conclusion I have to come to is I need to hold myself up because nobody's holding me up. And so that is in our physicality. And it's often, from my experience of in this field, it's often in the shoulders. And how many people come into our practice or our sessions with, oh, my shoulders are so tight, my shoulder, right? So, I mean, if we just pay attention, anybody listening, what's happening in your shoulders? Do you have some of that, that heldness? And then if we continue that psychology of nobody could hold me up, no one's there for me, later in life, that translates into I need to do it all myself because no one is there. So I got to do it. And then what does that feel like in your body? And how many people are those of us listening I need to do it all myself. I got to do it. So I think all of that just shows how those patterns live in us. I don't know if that answers your question or.
It definitely answers how our bodies make meaning from the past, I think, for sure, like how they kind of take what they didn't get and convert it into something in our present day. But I'm wondering but then my meaning making of that is like I would just say, oh, I've got tight shoulders, so I don't make further. So is it my brain then that says, oh, my shoulders are tight, but doesn't take any further meaning from that?
Well, yes and no, because if we flip over to polyvagal theory and we don't even need, it's part of the polyvagal theory, but it also exists on its own. And that is that the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in our bodies, has 80% of its fibers coming from my body to my brain, and only 20% go from my brain to my body. So when I sense that tightening in my shoulders, like you say, the vagus nerve comes in with its 80% of fibers and says, there's something wrong. You're all tensed up. You're defending against something. There's a problem here. So your brain then says, oh, there's a problem. Like, we better get ready for the problem. And then that loop keeps going. But again, I mean, you're asking a person who's going to favor the physicality.
Which is great. I think it's so important because so many of us don't, like myself included. I'm always thinking about I'm so much more in my head than I am in my body, and I want to learn. Basically, I guess my reason for answering is I wonder if I can understand my emotions from my body rather than from my brain.
Yeah. And I think that's already happening, and it's happening to all of us on such a level that it's sort of what I talked about at the beginning. It's an adaptive pattern that we just take as that's the way things are until we can intercept the pattern. Should we do a little experiential thing too?
Yes, please. Let's do it. Yeah.
So we live on planet Earth. So we have the force of gravity coming toward the planet. We have the Earth spinning, giving off a centrifugal force. Something on the planet goes up. We have anti-gravity. So we have gravity coming this way, anti-gravity here. This is where we meet the planet. This is where we live our life, and we just kind of go along from. Trauma comes along and knocks us off that support. There was no one there to protect us, to take care of us, and we lost support. So let's explore how we can have some sense of bringing support back. The universal support. Because support, it's nice, like you have a friend and your friend says, oh, hey, you look really good today. Oh, that's supportive. There's lots of ways, but this is the support of the universe. We have a lot of forces that we don't really pay attention to, but they can be really helpful when we pay attention to them. So let's start, just so we have a before and after, do some kind of movement. If you're sitting, you can just sort of rock side to side. You can move your arm around, just something that you can repeat. So I love that we're all having some version of pink today. We got the memo. Okay. And then leave that for a moment. Now I'll ask the question, as you were doing that movement, did you have any sense of your feet?
No.
Right. Most people would say that same thing. So now bring your attention to your feet. And then more specifically, the bottoms of your feet. And the bottoms of your feet and how and where they meet the ground. And for most of us, this is something most people do not pay attention to. And yet it's quite readily available to us. And then it's obvious that the ground is under you, but it's not so obvious that the ground supports you. The ground is under you in a supportive way. So what happens when you recognize the ground is supporting me? So again, if you're standing, it's through your feet. If you're sitting, it's your feet and your hips on the chair. What happens as you receive the support that the planet offers? Yeah. And then, can I open to receive that support? So are my ankles free enough to receive support? Are my knees free enough to receive some kind of support? And my hip joints free enough to let the support in? And my lower torso is supported. And my middle torso supported. And my upper torso, my ribs, my breath, my arms are supported from the ground, not holding me up. And then my neck. And go back to the ground. We so quickly lose that contact. And then up through your head. and then looking around the room with that support. So you orient to your space with that support. Yeah. And then go back to your movement. How does it feel to do that movement now with your support? Yeah. So that gives you some idea of intercepting the pattern. And if either of you want to say anything, you can. You don't have to, obviously.
I found it like really interesting, especially when we were going up and you said, remember your support on your feet, because it's quite easy to lose that, to forget that that was the kind of, I've got to remember that I'm supported. And I think when I did the movement with I was much more mindful of the movement itself, but the movement felt like I think because I was feeling the support below, my lower body felt heavier. Therefore, the movement felt lighter, but more mindful at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
think it was like a
Let me just comment on that. And the lighterness is not, obviously we don't lose weight in the moment, but we tend to, like I was saying before with the shoulders, we tend to weight ourselves. And when we stop that weighting down, the system says, oh yes, I'm lighter. And the holding at the bottom says I'm supported.
Yeah,
Mm.
I feel like I felt like an anchor down below, like from the seat to my feet, and then here felt much freer. Yeah, it was really interesting.
For me, it was a more physical experience, like lots of small micro adjustments in my body. I'm not moving, but things were cracking and popping and releasing. And then when I went to move at the end, there was a lot less of that kind of creakiness, because as I sat down and was just letting go, I actually felt like even like my bum cheeks, 'cause at one point just kind of it just the kind of grip into the seat and just go, actually no, let go. There's no expectation to have to hold yourself on the seat. Just let that go. And my feet, rather than, it was I suddenly became conscious that I think I'm gripping with my toes, almost like my whole foot wasn't flat on the floor. It was, so I just felt lots of physical sensations, small physical adjustments happen through the course of that I guess I can understand that likeness, but it was more of a relaxation to me than a likeness. I felt more
Yes.
um yeah, like I come down a level.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. You've come down a level because you were doing that level up of work, and when the system came in and said you're supported, you don't really need to do that. Your system said, "Oh, okay, great," and then doesn't do it, you know? So it's like it's not what's so beautiful about it is it's not manipulating. We didn't, manipulate anything or force anything. It's just like something that's there and that's available. And so and I want to make a distinction here because some people will translate this into, oh, it's like grounding. They'll say that, but I'd make a distinction that when most people do grounding, they sort of go down into the ground and sort of collapse and get heavy all around. And yet my idea of support is different. It's coming in touch with the ground in order to receive this upward direction. And I'll explain the upward direction in another way for those of you who don't sort of buy into the gravity, anti-gravity story. There's something in physics called the ground reaction force. This is like I say, you can Google it. It's a physics thing. And the ground reaction force says as much weight as I put in the Earth, the planet, the Earth matches that. And that's amazing that that's like a thing, you know? Because theoretically, that means we can all really be weightless. Because I put this much weight in, the Earth supports it. Wow. But of course, we know, especially from our trauma work, that a lot more goes into how we experience our own weight than that. That's available, though. But, we have heaviness coming from lots of other directions.
I think it's a really nice and simple and effective technique, though, if you are feeling kind of overburdened and unsupported, just to be like, okay, hang on a second, just let me start to be mindful of what is actually supporting me. If I feel that nothing is, my partner, my kids, my life, my colleagues, whatever it is that aren't supporting me, hang on a second, because I can always rely on the earth to support me.
Absolutely. That's why for me, this is my contribution to the trauma world, is these universal forces that really help us in those moments when things are difficult.
I'm pleased that you made that distinction as well, because I was drawing parallels to like a yoga nidra practice, but that is definitely about more kind of, I think there are some parallels in the sort of sensing parts of our body that we've that drawing attention to places of the body and parts of the body that we wouldn't, but the difference being this beautiful sort of symbiotic relationship of the downward and the upward force meeting in this kind of harmonious space, which is really it was really quite beautiful to experience. And in amongst a busy day, to have that moment to and it wasn't long, but to just be present, be aware, be held.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people doing, often when I teach this a lot because I do it a lot and it helps me a lot, right? So a lot people's comments are, oh, my shoulders let go, and that, well, similar to Minta's, the lightness up here, part of that is a let go of that. And that goes back to what the early days of the not being held and the I need to, because if we don't know that we're supported, we hold ourselves up.
Mm-hmm.
And when we feel the support, it's like, oh, I don't need to hold myself up. I'm being supported.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a different perspective on being.
Yeah, it allows you to let go and then focus on where your energy, you should be.
Yeah. In the trauma work, if I was working with somebody, one-on-one, and I said, allow the support to come up through you. And somebody would say, okay, my ankles can receive the support, but my knees, oh, my left knee, no, it doesn't want to receive support. So we would work in that realm. And so related to that is our human uprightness is not something that we paste on, like, oh, I'm going to stand up straight, kind of thing. But it's something that we open to receive. And that just has such a different impression inside.
And it gives you the opportunity to identify where in the body you're holding those experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's where, like I say, that's where you can work or pay attention.
Beautiful. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast guests, which is, we live in a world of exaggerated anxiety and doubt and fear, whether that's the geopolitical climate, as you're only too aware at the moment, landscape, coming right down to the sort of the societal piece, the community piece, your immediate sphere of influence with your family and your colleagues, or that relationship with ourselves. At whatever level you look, there's a lot happening at the moment. If there was a single lever for change that you could pull, or a button that you could push that would be the catalyst or be the start of the change that we need to see, what would that be, Betsy?
Well, for me, I would say, similar to what we just did, was receiving support. As you receive the support, something comes in that allows a little bit of expansion. And in that expansion is the beginning of breath. So we have, I call it support, suspension, expansion, and then the in and the out of breath. And I think you can't lose if you're, it takes the edge off, and it doesn't take away, everything that's going on, but it helps me manage with it.
I think that's really, profound. And I think if we just had a still of Minter and I's posture and position on this podcast at the start and at the end, they'd see what's possible just in a visual, but also, grateful and for the opportunity to have that moment in today. So, yeah, thanks for joining us, Betsy. It's been a great conversation. We appreciate your time and your energy. Thank you.
Well, let me say here too that I appreciate so much what you're doing. My most of my experience is through Oxford, and that's just the most community building, trauma discussing, people caring gathering that is. So however you do that, I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a part of it as well as being on this podcast. We really are so grateful that you're part of that community, because it's the community that makes it, not us, to be totally honest. So
Yeah. Well, you do something to get it started.